Hello! Thank you all for tuning into another edition of Outside the Shop with me, your host, Daryl D. Lane. As always, I want to thank you all for tuning in, where I get to talk about everything that I normally don't get to talk about in my regular sports podcast, Barbershop Sports Talk, which you can all find on Spotify, iTunes, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, SoundCloud, the whole 10 yards and more on all those podcasting platforms. The podcast that I released yesterday, I had Kenny Simon, scouting expert for 247 Sports, and I had Scotty Johnson on, talked about the GM coaching minutiae and details that's going on in the NFL right now. Also with Scotty, I talked a lot about the NBA, though I did not get a chance to talk about James Harden because that was the big news that went down. And for the podcast that I'm going to be recording tonight and I'll release tomorrow, I'm going to have my friend Ben Karen on, host of the Sports Property Podcast and Facebook group headmaster. And I'm going to make a special announcement about a bet I lost. So definitely check that out there because it will be changing my Facebook profile pick. And also, me and Ben, we're going to talk about college football. We'll get into that. NFL predictions, as always. Maybe get into some other stuff, too, but definitely check that out. And that podcast will be released tomorrow morning. Actually, I'll probably release it midnight tonight if you guys really want to get ahead of it. Now, let's start with this. James Harden being traded from the Houston Rockets to the Brooklyn Nets. I just want to give everybody the details of this trade. So it's a four-way deal. The Rockets received Victor Oladipo, Dante Exum, Rodney Kourakis, 3 unprotected Brooklyn Nets first-round picks. 3. One in 2022, 2024, and 2026. And 4 unprotected Nets pick swaps for 2021, 2023, and 2025, and 2027, and a 2022 Milwaukee Bucks first-round pick, and it's via Cleveland. What the Cleveland Cavaliers got in the trade were Jared Allen and Taurean Prince, while the Indiana Pacers add Chris LeVert and a 2023 second-round selection from the Houston Rockets. And the Brooklyn Nets, of course, get James Harden. And also, by the way, James Harden now going to the Brooklyn Nets. Guess how much he's going to get paid in taxes? He's going to have to pay in taxes now because he's in Texas, right? He's living in Texas where there's no state taxes. He's going to New York, which I live in New York. I'm a resident of New York. Folks, you get taxed a lot in New York. $13 million. I just saw an estimation of this. They had this on Yahoo. $13 million he's going to be having to pay in taxes. Folks, that's what happens when you move from Houston to Brooklyn. So James might be happy. You know, maybe better nightlife, more strip clubs for James Harden. But, you know, he's going to be losing more dollar bills than just at the strip club. He's going to be losing some dollar bills when it comes for tax time when Uncle Sam comes. So in terms of who won this trade, I want to look back, and I want everybody to look back at this. There was once a trade with the Boston Celtics and the Brooklyn Nets, coincidentally, right, that involved in 2013, the Nets got Kevin Garnett, Paul Pierce, and Jason Terry. And what happened was the Nets, in this, they gave up a bunch of picks, a bunch of pick swaps, basically gave their whole future. And what ended up happening is that Brooklyn Nets team had Paul Pierce, Kevin Garnett, Darren Williams, Joe Johnson, Brook Lopez. That team won nothing. I think they got swept by Miami, too, in the second round, if I'm not mistaken. And whenever it was when that whole thing happened. But those picks that Boston got back, it added Jason Tatum, star right now in the league. A Jaylen Brown, star right now in the league. It added a Colin Sexton. And that Colin Sexton pick allowed the Boston Celtics to get Kyrie Irving, to bring Kyrie Irving into the fold. And Kyrie Irving ended up leaving, but that pick allowed them to get Kyrie Irving. So Boston killed that trade. Even though they didn't win it at the start, they won it at the end. I think this could be the exact same scenario with the Brooklyn Nets and the Houston Rockets. Because let's think about this. Right? Let's think about this. In 4 years, right? Because all these picks are extending all the way to like 2027. In 2027, are we sure the Brooklyn Nets are going to be a good basketball team? Are we sure about that? Probably not. In 3 years, are they going to be contending for championships? Kevin Durant is like 31. James Harden's 31. Kyrie's near 30. These guys are all older. Like, this thing can only be a 2 to 3 year thing. And then as you get deeper in the weeds, it helps the Houston Rockets. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see how all this plays out. Now, in terms of how all this works, I want to start with this in terms of, can James Harden, Kyrie Irving, and Kevin Durant work on the court? Let's start with James Harden. Actually, no, let's start with Kyrie. So here's the deal with Kyrie. He's a guy that's been going AWOL, hasn't showed up to practice, hasn't showed up to games, doesn't even tell the GM, the coach what's going on. Nobody knows where he's at. And this is a guy that's supposed to be one of your leaders and one of your best players. Right now they have Kevin Durant, James Harden, Kyrie Irving. They're supposed to be building chemistry and playing together, building a cohesive unit. And Kyrie's just AWOL right now. And Stephen A. Smith is reporting on First Take that he doesn't think Kyrie cares about basketball. Hearing guys like Chris Broussard say this type of stuff. Stephen A. Smith is saying Kyrie should retire. So Kyrie's head is at a completely different place from where it needs to be. Completely different place from where it needs to be. So we don't know what's going on with Kyrie, if he's gonna play, what he's gonna do. And also, here's the thing: Kyrie signed up to go to Brooklyn to be Robin, to Kevin Durant's Batman. And you might say, oh, it's a great situation. But do you really think he signed up to go to the Brooklyn Nets knowing he was going to be the second option to now be the third option? Because make no mistake, James Harden's a better basketball player than Kyrie Irving. He went from being Robin to Alfred, the butler. You know, doesn't seem like Kyrie. We've seen with Kyrie, he gets bored very quickly. He was in a great situation with Boston. Brad Stevens, great organization, great GM and Danny Ainge. You have Tatum, you have Brown. They go to the Eastern Conference Finals without him and Gordon Hayward. And Kyrie's like, I got bored. He's with the Cleveland Cavaliers, going to the finals every single year, competing for championships with LeBron James, the greatest basketball player in the world. Some people might say the greatest player of all time. And he gets bored, and he's like, I want to do something else. Kyrie gets bored very easily, loses his attention very easily, and will decide he wants to go out on a limb, go off a cliff, and do something else. This could happen in Brooklyn. I think that's a concern. Now let's get to James Harden. One of your star players decides to not like a situation, so he becomes fat and out of shape and stops trying on the basketball court. That's one of your leaders. That's one of your best players. How does that read? How does that make sense? DeMarcus Cousins was saying how he disrespected the game, how he disrespected the team. Not a good look for James Harden. So I don't know how James Harden fits in all this. And then we get to Kevin Durant. Kevin Durant's the most sane and the most trusted out of all these individuals psychologically. I don't know if that's a good thing. Kevin Durant's a guy that's like, I like Golden State one minute, I hate Golden State the next minute. I love Russell Westbrook, then it's like, I don't want to deal with Russell Westbrook. So we have three very fickle, interesting personalities all combining together. That can be a bomb waiting to set off. That's like you're doing gas and then somebody decides to throw a match and let's see what happens. Let's add all these personalities and see what happens. Let's make things as crazy and unpredictable. We bring in Steve Nash, a guy that's never coached before, and the biggest media market in the world, and let's see what happens, right? You know, let's just see what happens. This isn't a billion-dollar industry. Let's see what happens. There was a stat. Kyrie, James Harden, and Kevin Durant. I just want to read you this. So they all have the three highest usage rate percentages, and usage rate is how long you have the ball in NBA history. Excuse me, in the NBA right now. So Russell, so I'm looking at this right now. So James Harden, 30.7%. You're looking at Kyrie Irving at 29.3%, and Kevin Durant at 30.2%. All of them are like top 8 out of all the players in the league. So these are all players that need the ball in their hands, like to have the ball in their hands. And as I said before, the best player on this team who's the best equipped to play off the ball is Kevin Durant. But you want the ball in Kevin Durant's hands. You don't want him being the one to play off the ball. Also, who's going to be the grit and grind guy? Who's going to be the guy that's okay having 15 shots one night and saying, okay, coach, I'm going to play defense? Is that going to be Kyrie? Is that going to be James Harden? Who's going to be the glue guy? Who's going to be the guy that sacrifices everything? We've seen with big threes. Chris Bosh had to sacrifice. And instead of saying, hey, I'm going to get 20 shots like I did in Toronto, I'm going to play great pick and roll defense. I'm going to be a spacer for LeBron and Dwayne Wade. Kevin Love, instead of me getting 25 and 18 in Minnesota, I'm going to be a spacer for LeBron. I'm going to be a spacer for Kyrie. Who's the guy taking the sacrifice here? Who's the guy? Because it can't be Kevin Durant. It cannot be Kevin Durant. And if Kevin Durant's the one sacrificing, that is a failure on Steve Nash, the coach. Kevin Durant shouldn't be sacrificing the damn thing. So is it James Harden? Is it Kyrie? Who's that guy? Who's that guy that's going to play defense? I'm serious. So these are all questions that need to be answered if the Brooklyn Nets are going to be able to compete for a championship. They have the talent, but you want to know if talent was everything? The Lakers, when they had Dwight Howard, Steve Nash, Kobe Bryant, and Pau Gasol, they would have won a championship that year. And you want to know who won the championship that year? I believe it was the San Antonio Spurs. So talent doesn't always equal we're going to win. Now I'm going to get to the NFL. Urban Meyer's reportedly in advanced talks with the Jacksonville Jaguars. It looks like he will be the head coach. My friend Ben Karen, who I love, who is going to be on the podcast tonight, he always kept telling me, Daryl, he has a cyst in his head. He's not playing. He's not going to coach again. And I told him, listen, $12 million, prestige, money, clout, trying something new, it's a big allure. It's a big allure, right? Urban Meyer's a football coach. He's a football guy. I guarantee you there's nights where he's sitting there with his wife and he gets bored. And he's like, you want to know what? I know I'm not coaching right now, but I want to be in the weeds. I want to be hands-on. I want to be doing this, right? So I think that's really important to remember with these guys. Like, he's 54. He's still early in his life. Like, I think he has a couple coaching stops in him. I think he's going to be in Jacksonville for a bit. Then I think he's going to go back to college football, whether it's at a USC or a Notre Dame, right? I think we underestimate, how much they have all the money in the world, but it makes them happy to what they're doing. That's why you see guys play 10, 12 years in sports when they've already made the money, right? Like, why are they playing again, right? Sometimes it's success, it's trying something new, it's challenging yourself, and obviously he's thinking about it and he's considering it. I'm going to get to this. OC firings. Randy Fitchner of the Pittsburgh Steelers got fired, and Brian Schottenheimer of the Seattle Seahawks offensive coordinator got fired. Both these guys, bad offensive coordinators. The offenses regressed through the season. You saw how Pittsburgh got worse on offense. You saw how Seattle got worse on offense throughout the season. Both these guys have quarterbacks that are supposed to be top 15 in the league. Russell Wilson, top 3. Ben Roethlisberger, even at his advanced age, should be a top 15 quarterback, and they just regressed in terms of having bad playoff games. Roethlisberger, 4 picks in a playoff game, just awful. While Cleveland was missing their whole defensive backfield and their coach. You look at Seattle, Russell Wilson, playoff game, 40% completion percentage, just awful. Both these teams need some new offensive coordinators, some new lifeblood to spice things up, to get it just a little bit different, because right now it's not working. So, Baltimore Ravens won't back down from the blitz against the Buffalo Bills and quarterback Josh Allen. So, Josh Allen's been really good against the blitz this year. He has 19 touchdowns, a league high against pressure. Baltimore Ravens, they blitz 41% of the time. So, something has to give. We have one team that blitzes a lot. We have one quarterback who's really good against the blitz. I think Josh is going to do well. But I do want to say this in the Baltimore Ravens' favor. Josh Allen, and I love Josh, he has not seen corners like Marcus Peter and Marlon Humphrey. Right? A little bit different, right? They're blitzing, but they have 2 guys on an island that can cover. And that's all part of it. You can blitz, but if you blitz and you don't have the guys in the back that can hold up, then that becomes a little bit of an issue. And I think Baltimore has that. So I think this game will be very interesting. And now, lastly, Odell Beckham Jr. says, don't be surprised if the Cleveland Browns pull off an upset against the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, you might say Odell's crazy. They can't beat the Chiefs. Here's what I'm going to say. For Cleveland to win, here's what's going to need to happen. Your first-round picks need to show up. Cleveland's been bad for a long time, and since they've been bad, they've gotten the right to draft high in the NFL draft. So all the picks that you got, and all the guys that you drafted out of college, this is when your scouting department shines through and you give them the game ball. Guys like Myles Garrett, first overall pick. You need 3.5 sacks for Myles Garrett. You need him in Patrick Mahomes' grill the whole time. Guys like Denzel Ward, a guy you drafted top 5. You need him to shut down a Tyreek Hill. You need him to maybe cover a Travis Kelce. He needs to show up. You look at Baker Mayfield, their number 1 overall pick at quarterback. Maybe doesn't have to throw 5 touchdowns and outgun Patrick Mahomes, but no turnovers. Efficient, good football. You even go to Jared Willis Jr., their tackle out of Alabama. He needs the block. He needs to keep a clean pocket for Baker Mayfield. If Cleveland is to win this game, all their first-round picks, the equity they have acquired for being bad the last 5-10 years, those guys have to come up big. Because that's what it's going to take. It's going to take a village. It's going to take a kingdom to go into Chiefs' kingdom and win that game. So I'm looking forward to it. And like I said, that's all we have for this edition of Outside the Shop. Like I said, if you want to check out the podcast, you can check it out on Spotify, iTunes, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, on all your podcasting apps and platforms. And as I'm looking at this, predictions for the Ravens and the Bills, you have to tune into the podcast where me and Ben give our picks if you want to hear the prediction. But I'm still deciding. I think this is going to be one of the best games of the weekend. Bills versus Ravens. I think it's going to be really interesting, but you're going to have to tune in to get my exact thoughts on that. And thank you, everybody, for tuning into this edition of Outside the Shop. Have a great night, and God bless.